We will start with a short overview about triggers. Triggers are database objects that you define on a table, and they will be fired or they will be triggered when you perform an operation like insert, update, or delete on the table where you define the trigger. The operations or the statements that will be executed as part of the trigger are name of our triggering SQL statement. So in there you can put, for example, another statement like an insert on a different table, or you can perform some validation as part of the logic of the trigger. We will provide some examples as part of this series or as part of this lesson. So there are three types of triggers. We have a before, after, and instead of a trigger. Before trigger means, let's say you are doing an insert, then before the insert actually finishes, then the trigger will be doing something else, and then once the trigger finishes whatever it has to do, whatever it was doing, the insert would be allowed to continue with its process, which was inserting something. After trigger means that the operation finishes, then the trigger will be fired. So for example, if you are doing an update, then after the update completes, the trigger will be fired. And then we have instead of trigger, which are triggers that you will define on a view. Normally you are doing, let's say, an update operation on a view. Views are read only, so you cannot really update a view. So when you perform an update operation on a view, you really have to be updating the base tables that define that view. Through an instead of trigger, you can do this update of the base tables. Moving on to the next section, we have an example of a before trigger, and there is the trigger that we will be illustrating. So we have this is the syntax of the trigger, and this is the name of the trigger. In this case, it is called default class underscore end, and then we have no cascade. That is just part 1. Here we have before insert, so that is basically what it is telling me, is that this is a before trigger and it is before an insert operation. And then we have on sched, so this is the table where I am defining the trigger on. Then we have referencing new as end. This is used for correlation, and I will explain this in more detail in the next few slides, especially when I talk about after triggers, but you can use this as a prefix on the code. And then we have for each row. For each row means that the trigger will apply for each row on the table. And mode db2sql, it is a fixed mode, so this is the only mode that is supported. And then we have when. This is the part of logic or the triggering statement. So here I am saying when ending is null, set n ending and starting plus 1 are ending. Let me show you this with a diagram here. What is happening is that the CL sched table, which by the way is part of the sample database, has these 4 columns: class, code, day, starting and ending. Now let's say if I am doing an operation like this where I am trying to insert into this table and I'm putting class, code, day and starting with these values, but note here that I'm not providing ending, so I am trying to insert a record into this table and then I am not providing the value of ending. So let's go back to the logic of the trigger. It says here when ending is null, set ending and starting plus 1 are. So what does this mean? In this case, what is the value of ending? Since we are not providing that value, it means that ending has a value of null, so this trigger logic would apply, and therefore that will be inserted. Here in this row will be the following, will be okay. First of all, it is ABC, right, as the class code, so I'll put here ABC. For the day, we'll put 1 as is shown here, and then starting it says that it will insert 10, and for ending it will be inserting 11, because based on the logic of the trigger, that will be the value of ending, as you can see again from this slide. When ending is null, set ending starting plus 1 are. So what we are seeing here is that you can see basically that this trigger, this before trigger, is being used for validation work. validating what type of data we could input into the table. So we were just inserting 10, and now ending will be have a value of now 11. Alright, now moving on to the next slide, we have another trigger with the value of validate sched, and actually if you take a look at the logic of this trigger, the first three lines are very similar in terms of the logic as the previous trigger, so we can create this trigger and do some tests. And then also something interesting about this trigger is that we are using the signal statement. The signal statement is basically used to raise an exception yourself. So again, this before triggers are used for validation, and sometimes when you are inserting something that is not supposed to be inserted, then you want to raise an exception, you want to raise an error. So you can do what with the signal statement, which in this example it is saying if ending 21, so it means if ending is greater than 9 p.m., then signal an error with SQL state of 80000, and the message of that error will be class's ending time is beyond 9 p.m. So let's create this trigger. But before we create the trigger, let me first open the control center here, and I have here trigger as well. So let me just copy paste this trigger while the control center is starting. Copy paste, and then from the control center we are looking at the sample database, and right now if we take a look here, we can look at the triggers, and well, right now we have not created any trigger. I just explained to you the previous trigger, but we never created it. So now what we are going to do is we are going to create a trigger. We can create triggers from different places. Okay, let me show you first how to create a trigger from this. Clicking on the fourth button from the control center around here, I am going to first add a sample database. Basically, I am connecting to the sample database. The trigger is a database object that resides only in a database. So first I need to connect to the database, and then I want to create a trigger in this database. Okay, I want to clear the result here just to keep it clean, and I just copy paste trigger that I mentioned before. This one validates sched, and then I'm going to run this. But before I run this, I have to make sure that I put a right terminator. In this case, it is the @ symbol, and I explain why I need to change this terminator in the lesson where I talk about tools. So now when I execute this command, and as you can see this trigger was created successfully. So that is great, and let me clear the results here, and I just clear this information as well. So now the trigger has been created. So let's run some queries to test if the trigger is working as it is supposed to work. So let's it run. If I run this, if I paste this insert statement, what is going to happen here? In this case, you know that I am not providing an ending column. So if I execute this insert statement, I get first of all that the operation was successful, so that is good. Now I'm going to perform a select statement. So let's say select asterisk from CL-sched, and when I click on the execute button, I get this value def 2, 18, and 19. Note here what has happened is I was entering the value of 18 6 p.m. and for ending I get 19 or 7 p.m. right? If we took again at the SQL that I just executed, I was executing or inserting only 18 for starting, and I did not provide any value for ending. However, as you can see from the output, now ending has a value of 19, and that is because of the trigger. Okay, let's try something else, and here I have another statement where I am providing a value for ending, but I am not providing a value for the day. So let's use null. Well, basically I am providing null for the day. So let's see what happens when I do that. So I am going to highlight this column, this statement. I am going to execute it, and now I get an error. It looks like an error. But actually, when you get an SQL code of -438 plus +438, that means it is an application defined error. So the trigger itself is raising this error. Why is it raising this error? Let's see what happened here. So we were executing the insert statement and we put null for the day. So that really does not matter, because what matters here, it is the put 22 or 10 p.m. for ending, and the error that I am getting is I got an application raise error with diagnostic text plus ending time is beyond 9 p.m. Okay, so as you can see, ending was set to 10 p.m. and that is why the trigger is giving me this error message with this value. Okay, and again it repeats here the second error message, application raise error with diagnostic text plus ending time is beyond 9 p.m. I'm going back to the trigger. You can see that this is what I have here, plus ending time is beyond 9 p.m. So that is something what I want the trigger to do. Let's do one more test, which is to run this other insert statement, and in this case, now what we have is that the value for the day is 7, and looking at the code here, we said that if the day is 7, then raise this other condition, plus cannot scheduled on a weekend. So let's run that insert statement. Let's clear the result here. Let's clear all the this and let's just execute this statement, and now again I get another error, but again this is an application defined error. And as you can see, when I move up here, it says class cannot be scheduled on a weekend. So that is exactly what we want the trigger to do. Class cannot be scheduled on a weekend. So that is an example before trigger, and again before triggers are very good to use for validation as we show in the example. Okay, so let's move on to the last section of this presentation, which is an after trigger example. So what we have here in this after trigger example is a trigger called audit.msal, and before working on this trigger, you have to create this table called audit with these columns. Now again, so we have create trigger audit msal, that is the name of the trigger, and here we have what we say trigger, and it is an after and update operation. Now it is after the update on the salary column on the employee table. So the employee table is as well as part of the sample database. And there is a column in that table that has a salary column. So let me just quickly show you. Let's use this other command window just to make you practice with different tools. So from here, I'm going to connect to the sample database, and then here I am going to select asterisk from employee. Okay, and as you can see, if I move up here, well, there are many columns. The no employee, number, first name, etc. Here is the salary column. So if we look again at the trigger, it says after update on the salary column on employee, do something. Now if we have here referencing old as O, new as N, so this is the what I was mentioning before in terms of correlation, and here I'm going to explain in more detail. That is used for basically prefixes in your logic. So old as O, what does mean is the old value. So in the case we are doing an update, right? So that means whatever was already on the table that you want to update, refer to it in the code, in the triggering statement as 0, and then the value that you put in the update statement refer to that as n or as a new table. So the new value refers to the as n, and this will become clear as I continue with this example. Then we have for each row, it means for each row on the table, and then mode db to sql. That is the only mode that is supported right now. And then that we have here is insert into audit table values, and then we have different information here. So what we are doing here basically is the following. Let's say I just joined a company and I'm junior DBA, and my senior DBA, who was my boss, has granted me authorization to many of the tables, and one of the tables that he wants me to access is the employee table. Now the employee table has the salary of all the employees in the company, and it happens to have many salary as well. So I say, well, I'm not happy with my own salary, let's say, so let me raise my own salary, and I say, okay, let me do an update statement on this employee table and see what happens. So maybe I do something like this. I can say, for example, db2 update salary, sorry, update employee, because the name of the table is employee, set salary equals, let's say, 100,000 or 1 million. Dollars were, well, let's pick one of these rows. Let's say we're the first row says that the first name is, or the last name is has, right? So where first or last name is has, so we say where last name equals, oh sorry, I pressed the wrong button, it equals to has, I press enter and the command executed correctly. I can do again a select asterisk from employee to double check. And here you can see now from has, the salary has been changed to $1 million. Okay, so let's assume, oh, it says Christine has, anyway, let's assume I'm Christine has and I change the salary to $1 million. Now this is before the trigger was created, but if the trigger had been created, what would happen? Well, let's create the trigger right now, see what will happen. And again, I put this information in notepad because it is just easier to copy paste. And before we can create this trigger, we need to create this audit table, because I invoke that, or I use the audit table trigger. Now I'm going to work on this command editor again, just so you see different tools. And okay, I can execute this if this is just one statement that I don't need to put a terminator, but let me just put a terminator, and I'm going to execute this, and the table is created successfully. So that is perfect, clear the result. Now I'm going to create a trigger, so let me clear this out from here and let me create the trigger that is here. So let me just copy paste, create trigger, etc., and I'm going to create a trigger. Here I do need to put the @ symbol and execute, and now the trigger has been successfully created. So that is great as well. And now let's test this trigger. Well, the previous example, I was able to insert 1 million rows, sorry, dollar number 1 million as my salary for Christine, but now I have created the trigger. Let's see what happens. So let's say now I want to, oh actually let's continue with this example. Let's see the salary for employee with the employee number of 10. So if I execute this, it happens to be the same record that I picked before. It shows that salary is $1 million. Now if I change this and I perform an update operation on this same record, right, that will be updated. And let's say, so from 1 million I'm going to put 9 million, so 9,999,999. So let's execute this update statement. Let me clear the result here, and I perform the update, and the update is as well successful. So what did the trigger do? Well, the trigger was writing into a different table called audit, right? So let's take a look. First, let's take a look at the update what that was performed. So if I go here, clear the results, and I select asterisk from employee, now we see that the new salary has been increased. So that is working fine. But now what did the trigger do? Well, the trigger was actually inserting something into the audit table. What did it insert? Let's do a select asterisk from audit to see what it inserted. And when I issue the select asterisk from audit, this is what the trigger inserted. It says the timestamp and then the employee with. This employee number 000010 salary change from 1 million to 9 by the user ID who did it. So if I was again going back to the example, when a new employee and a new database administrator in this company, and I try to do something that is not honest, and I try to raise my own salary, I will be caught by, let's say, my senior or my boss, because he created a trigger which is writing into this audit table. So this is how a trigger can be used in this case as an after trigger, and basically for auditing purposes in this. Example, by the way, if you look again at the code here, you can see that we have used 0 now, so that will be the old value of employee number. That means the value was on the table, or salary means the old value or the salary, and salary will be new salary. And in the example that I was showing, this will be 1 million and this will be